Welcome to the Design Build Show. This is my great friend, Mr. Austin Way here.
Hello.
Hey Way, I beat this dude's ass all the time. As you can see, I'm much bigger than him. But he puts up a good fight.
Thank you.
Yeah. He's actually a good wrestler. And I feel sometimes embarrassed because he holds his own against me and he shouldn't. But anywho, Mr. Way, what you are a computer geek.
Yes. Well, I guess more specifically, I'm a web developer. Mostly code in Node, which is JavaScript. Do front-end development, back-end development. Basically, help build web applications for clients and whatnot.
Cool.
Yeah.
You lost me at a certain point.
Okay. Where you want me to back up to?
Man, it's fine.
Okay.
I go into glee a lot on this subject. I think I just like calling you computer geek.
Fair enough.
And let me be ignorant with it,
Okay.
But I wanted to have Austin on the show because it's comparable and relatable to design build. We build buildings, and Austin builds. What the hell you build?
We'll call them applications.
Applications on the computer.
That's right.
Computer stuff.
Yeah.
And there is a design component and a build component.
It's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And part of the design build movement is educating folks on what design build is and how it relates to compare it to other industries and professions, because that gives one more reality on the current state of the industry and how it's fucked up in terms of having this separation between the designer and the executor, the architect and the builder. A great analogy is the chef who never cooked. It wouldn't never make sense to have a separate person who just wrote recipes and then somebody who just cooked. And particularly, maybe that exists in terms of a recipe, a cookbook, right? But the person who wrote that cookbook has cooked a lot. Whereas in our profession, the architect is separated and disconnected from the builder. Education is, in particularly. And so it's helpful to look at other industries and relate it. So we were talking, and you were saying, I've heard of this term architect.
Sure.
What does that term mean in the application web?
Well, I mean, in my mind, I guess the architect is the guy who lays out. So usually with any application, there's some sort of problem you want to solve, right? Let's say it's I don't know, watching videos. Okay, it's entertainment, like Netflix. Okay. I mean, there are a million ways to go about it. The architect, his job is essentially to, based on the existing technologies available, to solve that problem. He decides, okay, here's how we're going to store all our videos. Here's how we're going to make these videos searchable. Here's how we're going to present the videos once they're requested for. Here's how we're going to build people. So he's got to know enough about his tools and the technologies and their limitations, so that he can put them all together and have these different components talk to each other to provide the end product of allowing an end user to watch a video when he wants.
Got it. And is he overseeing the whole process of the execution of that outline that he sets up?
I mean, I don't know for all, companies, it's really tough to speak to that. But, in my understanding is generally and also it depends on the size of the project. I mean, if you have somebody just building this, website to showcase my art project, I mean, you're not going to need a huge team. One person can probably figure that out by themselves. But if you have something, like a huge application like Google or Netflix or whatnot or Facebook, you probably have a guy this, chief technology officer, somebody like that, who's basically responsible for putting all the pieces together, knowing what is in their system, knowing what different components are in their system, knowing what security issues are in their system. And maybe security becomes such a big issue that you put somebody in charge specifically of security. You have a chief security officer. So, it really depends on the complexity and the size of the project you're doing. But at the end of the day, ultimately, I think for a project to be successful and cohesive, you would want somebody who kind of knows, at least on a general basis, all the different components and technologies related to the project and how they relate to each other.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Because then you can oversee it competently.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that position isn't always called an architect.
No, I don't think it would necessarily be called an architect.
Could be a call. You were saying project manager.
Project manager, chief technology officer. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it really depends on the project.
Got it.
I mean, even with a company like Google, they spawn, tons of other sub projects. So you have Google Photos, which is under the Google umbrella.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have no idea how their organization works, but I'm just guessing that their main Google chief technology officer, has the concept of what's happening within Google Photos, but the Google Photos project has somebody who's overseeing that project, who then relays whatever information necessary to the other guy.
Got it. But this term architect in the computer world, it's not necessarily like super well defined. It doesn't does it mean somebody who just stylistically like creates the look of the deal and then it's gonna...
No, in my mind I would think the term architect, if I saw it in a technology related context, I would think relates more to the what goes into your product. How is it put together? How do things talk to each other? It's not so much necessarily the physical layout of the application, how the user interfaces with it. I mean, you could have somebody named a UI architect, a user interface architect, who would be in charge of that, and that would make more sense. But if you were just to throw the term architect out there, generally speaking, I would think mainly somebody who deals with the actual design of the component. And when I say design, I'm not saying
The
visual
workability
design.
of it.
Exactly.
It's really the full picture.
Exactly, right.
Which makes sense because that is needed to start off with, to create a project up for success, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is, in an ideal world, what the architect in my industry does as well.
Yeah.
The issue is that architects today don't build, and as a result of that, don't know what costs are, don't know what schedules are, don't have all the resources in terms of the specialists that would execute the work and can't always think with that. So there's an inability to set that outline with all the proper components.
Yeah.
They might be able to just focus on specifically design, but just as in a computer project, if that's all you're focusing on, the thing may never ever actually work.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's so not a real product.
That's true. Yeah.
And you were mentioning a thing you've seen occur is the salesperson, who's actually getting is the earliest person on this start of this project.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So, I mean, I've been on certain projects where, there's a product. Let's say it's a service to handle, customer emails or something. So, like, one of our clients who wants to use our software, they basically buy our software to send out email campaigns to their clients, right? Just whatever, some random idea. Anyways, what happens is the sales team will talk to that person and start promising things like, yes, you can customize, the look and feel of your email, and you can filter your email list by where they live or their age group or something like that, and those requests or those features aren't actually necessarily built into the software. So what ends up happening is you have a guy who has no concept of what it takes to actually implement those requests, making the decision and design decision about how the software should behave. So it sounds like a similar case where there's a disjoint in communication between the guy responsible for designing and the guy actually responsible for building.
Yeah. And so what happened? What ends
Well,
up
obviously,
happening there?
either A, you can't deliver, B, you have to, develop like crazy, spend a lot of resource and time and energy on actually trying to meet the requirements, or B, you just you can't deliver the product and you lose a client.
Yeah. Hey man, for me, it was very real because I do the sales for my company, and initially what I'm doing is in a very short amount of time, go to a home and think with all the components, think with the problem the client's trying to solve, just like same thing. There's a problem we're trying to solve. What's the best way to do that? And I'm not going to nail it on that meeting. That's why there is a design process. But I do want to set expectations broadly at a high level of like, hey, here's what we can do. Here's what costs look like for that versus this. If you're not able to do that, I could dream with this client the most fascinating, amazing design. But if that is disconnected and that conversation never brings in, let's say, cost, it could be a complete, it's just not going to happen.
Right,
so,
right, yeah.
So yeah, that's very analogous. That's pretty cool. And we're both sports fans. You like the Eagles?
No, I just like football in general.
Okay. All right. And I think it's relatable to sports too.
Okay.
Let's take a coach.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. So Brad Stevens, we're in Boston. That dude was not in the NBA.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He's a head coach of the Boston Celtics. I don't know if he played college
I don't
basketball.
know.
But I guarantee you he played basketball. I guarantee you he played basketball. And he might not have been the best basketball player, but he can think with it all.
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
he can understand it all.
Right.
He can't go on the court and like compete and
right.
never could
Right.
with the level that. And we were talking about, especially as technology develops, it's going to be impossible to do every single facet.
Right.
But there does need to be somebody in charge who
Right.
can actually control what play is going to be run
Right.
and what have you. What do you think about that?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that, in order to successfully design something, and design it in a way that's realistic enough for it to actually become a product, you have to have some, practical experience with the underlying components. I mean, you can't just start whipping stuff up and then you have no way to implement it.
Yeah. And as a project gets bigger, I think this is another comparable. As a project gets bigger and as technology develops, there's more specialties, right?
Sure,
There's more
absolutely.
intricacies.
Absolutely.
And so, but it makes it all the more important to have this controlling, accountable entity.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like,
Yeah.
where's it going?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, and I think you do see that in certain projects when, being on certain teams, you feel the turmoil. Like, there's different departments. Somebody's in charge of quality control, somebody's in charge of development, somebody's in charge of actually managing the project. And if there's not somebody at the top who knows all those different aspects and what goes into those different aspects, there can be a lot of infighting within the team.
Yeah. Is it in your industry, there's always somebody in charge? Is that always, it's just known in your industry, there does need to be somebody like that wearing that, hat?
I guess it really depends, again, on the size of the project and the company, number of personnel. I mean, ideally, yes, somebody knows everything that's going into it. You know,
Mhm.
they might not know how to actually do it, but they know enough about the technology, about what it does and its impacts, uh, so that they know how to affect and play with the other
Mhm.
aspects of it.
Got it. Can you ever think of a scenario where a client
Uh-huh.
would say, "Hey, I'm going to hire this company to design my stuff,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to hire this company to build it"? Could that be a thing that does that ever happen? Or?
I mean, there are certain aspects when that happens. I mean, I could see a case where, like, you know, the client says, okay, here's the user interface design. This is, you know, how we want it to look. These are the colors we want to use. Here's an example of how I want it to appear when, you know, somebody visits my website, and then some other guy comes in and actually does the development.
Yeah.
But in that particular case, I think what happens is that, the coder, the guy who's doing the development, knows enough about his tools to be able to take that vision and translate it onto a web page.
Mhm.
But there are definitely certain instances when, you know, this is actually a problem that you run into, you know, a decent amount, when the designer doesn't understand the technology behind it and makes some requests, you know, or some visual features that are either very difficult to implement, or you know, would require a considerable amount of code to do it. And, you know, somebody who does have both the artistic ability and the coding ability would be able to steer around some of those, you know, fantasy or less easy to implement features.
Yeah, yeah.
So that definitely does occur, actually.
Yeah, and cool. And I would imagine it would be possible if that person, it's kind of like that architect, those could be separate entities in terms of if that person who created the outline
Yeah.
of the program or app or whatever
yeah.
could think with the whole execution while it was setting up that outline, and then that entity that took it, who's going to develop it, also could think with,
Yeah.
you know, the full components.
Yeah.
That could work, but it's not necessarily set up. There's more opportunity for some shit being problems.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you would get more back and forth, like, hey, you know, there's no way we could actually implement this special menu that you've designed. You know, how about we do this? Or they say, you know, we can't do this because ABC, and there's going to be dialogue back and forth, and that, you know, that's obviously time lost or whatnot.
Yeah.
But the problem is, you know, not everybody has their feet in both the aesthetic and the actual implementation, the technological aspect. So you end up with situations where you do have a lot of back and forth communication.
Yeah, yeah. I think in that scenario too, the person who's going to develop it and execute it would need to take full ownership for what came before.
Yeah,
Right?
sure.
A comparable is there's this company, and it's a common thing you see in my industry where it's not one entity, but firms are pairing up early in the design process, an architect and a builder.
Yeah.
But they're collaborating,
Yeah.
and there's an understanding of, hey, I'm gonna handle this aspect of it, the design. You're gonna make sure it's buildable. We're gonna work together, and they're collaborating. But the only way I see that really being effective, and there's this company called Bensonwood in New Hampshire. They do amazing work. They often have clients who work with a separate architect, but they are always the engineer of record, meaning they will take those and make them their own.
Gotcha.
So they're then taking ownership for it.
Yep.
And that gives the client, it's a huge deal because the client's never then going to have this back and forth.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. You know what I think? I think our industries are going to parlay at some point
Yeah. I can
and
see
just
that.
become one. Yeah, how can you see it? I'm serious because, like, 3D printers,
Yeah, I mean, sure.
like, that's all technology. I don't know. It's like, that's more technology than building.
Right.
But you can Google it and see a building being built with a 3D printer now.
Sure. I mean,
And it's not going to change. I'm gonna go off on a little bit. I got some more ideas on.
Go ahead.
And then you have BIM, right? Building information modeling.
Okay.
This is the new, instead of AutoCAD where you're drawing every line, you have components.
Yep.
So you basically can build the building with
Right.
all its components
Right.
and see through it
Right.
ahead of time.
Right.
At some point, with 3D printing, you're gonna be able to do that and then press print, and then like it's gonna do it. It's gonna just build itself.
Yeah. I can see that.
So it's good we get on board with each other now.
Sure.
So because we are gonna parlay. So you guys should just adopt Design Builder, because I feel like you don't have a name for the dude in charge. You got project manager, architect, computer geek, informational security, whatever the hell you're talking about.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
We'll put it out there.
Yeah.
We'll get it done.
Because design build is just a mindset.
Okay. Yeah.
It's really just a mindset of accountability and ownership for a project. That's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I love interviewing guys with like Austin, because it is relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a very interesting concept, and to see, how the architectural field, construction, how it got separated out is very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. It was never meant to be,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really make sense. And we're bringing it back. And thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Austin's gonna beat me up after this. And any parting words?
No.
All right.
See
Peace
ya.
out.